So EKGs, or electrocardiograms, work by detecting charges that move around inside the heart. And because of this, I'd now like to tell you guys about the details of how the heart behaves electrically. In particular, I'm going to talk about the heart's electrical conduction system. Talking about this will solidify our understanding of how a normal EKG tracing should look later on. So let's think conceptually about the heart. Let's pretend that the heart is a box, and that box consists of a whole bunch of smaller boxes that are making it up, and each of those smaller boxes we're going to pretend is a cell sitting inside the heart. Now heart cells, like all the other cells in the human body, are negative on the inside compared to anything else that might be surrounding the cells. But the cells of the heart are also special compared to other cells in the body, in that they don't just sit there being negative all the time. Instead, each of these cells undergoes a cycle in which it goes from being negative to being positive to going back to being negative again. The cells of the heart are able to communicate with each other so that when one cell becomes positive, the entire heart becomes positive. And when this happens, it's like the positivity takes over the heart like a wave takes over a shore. You could draw the wave of positive charge like this. And as the cells in the heart go back to being negative, you could draw the wave of negative charge that takes over the heart like this. But we all know that the heart doesn't really look like a box, and the cells inside the heart don't really look like the way we've described them in this diagram. So what does a real heart actually look like? Well, it looks something like this, and I know that this diagram isn't nearly as friendly as the box that's sitting on the left, so let me kind of demystify what it means. So what I've drawn here is actually a picture of the heart that's been cut in half so that you can see what's sitting on the inside. And the two oblongish circles that you're seeing in the diagram, which are here and here, those are actually hollow spaces inside of the heart. And both of these hollow spaces are divided in half by flaps of very tough tissue, which I've drawn in here in green, and those flaps are called valves. This means that the heart consists of 4 chambers. And actually the names of these chambers are pretty important, so I'm going to give them to you. So the first chamber is called the right atrium. The second one is called the right ventricle. The third one is called the left atrium. And then the fourth chamber is called the left ventricle. The two halves of the heart are separated by a structure in the middle called the septum. And something I should have mentioned to you guys before is it looks like in this diagram that the right atrium and the right ventricle are sitting on the left side of the diagram, and the left atrium and the left ventricle are sitting on the right side of the diagram. And this is not a mistake. The labeling is actually from the point of view of the patient. So if you imagine that this heart is sitting inside of a patient who's looking at you straight on, that patient's right side is actually your left, and vice versa for the left side of the patient's body. And so when we draw a heart, we always label it as if we're looking from the patient's point of view. A bit confusing, but a good thing to remember. Now, it's great that there are 4 chambers inside the heart because that allows the heart to be efficient about the way it directs the flow of blood inside the body. Because let's face it, that's the heart's main function, to pump blood. So it turns out that the right side of the heart, which consists of the right atrium and the right ventricle, is in charge of accepting blood from the body that has been kind of used up and depleted of energy, and then pumping it back to the lungs so that the blood can be recharged and get more energy. And then the left side of the heart, which consists of the left atrium and the left ventricle, accepts that blood that has gone to the lungs, and it takes it from the lungs and then pumps it out to the whole rest of the body so that it can get new energy. So that's what a heart really looks like, and now that we understand that, let's go back to what we really wanted to talk about, which was how charges actually move inside of this more real-looking heart. So if you go back to the box on the left, you'll see that charges are moving from one side of our box to the other, and that doesn't change if we consider a real heart. So as we described before, the cells in the heart begin negative on the inside, so the entire heart is in a negative state, but then cells in the right atrium get excited, and they become positive on the inside like so. And then the other cells surrounding that excited cell get wind of what has happened, and they also become positive. And as this continues to happen, a wave of positivity takes over the heart and spreads like so. And really the main thrust of that movement is in this direction. So how are the cells in the heart so intelligent that each cell can detect what's happening to its neighbors and then respond to it? It's as if the cells are talking to each other. Well, the reason is because the cells in the heart are actually physically connected to each other. And they're special in that respect because a lot of cells in the body don't behave like that. So if I were to draw two cells inside of the heart like so, I would actually not be entirely correct if I just drew a line down the middle separating them. What I should draw instead is something like this, where the two cells are actually connected to each other by a channel, and that channel is called a gap junction. It is the gap junction that allows one cell to detect what's happening to the other cell. So let's say the first cell and the second cell both start out negative, as they do inside of the heart. Well, if for some reason the cell on the left becomes positive, like so, then some of those positive charges are actually able to move to the second cell through the gap junction. And when the first positive charge makes it into the second cell, which is also negative on the inside, has the power to turn that positive charge and multiply it so that it too is completely positive on the inside. And this is how the message of positivity spreads from cell to cell inside of the heart. Now, can any of you see a problem with this system? It might not be obvious at first, but let's take a step back and think about what the heart actually is like. So the heart, like any other organ, has millions and millions and millions of cells. Now imagine that a single cell started out positive, and it somehow has to communicate its message to all the other cells surrounding it so that eventually the entire heart is positive. Well, if that single cell that turned positive had to communicate with all of its neighbors cell to cell, that would take a really, really long time because it really relies on diffusion. And all of you know that your heart works pretty fast. It beats at an average of 72 beats per minute, which is more than a beat per second. And that means that the heart has to go from being negative to being positive over and over again at least 72 times per minute. So how does this actually happen inside of the heart? Well, to answer that question, let's make a quick analogy. So let's pretend that the first cell in the heart that turned positive, which as you recall was right here, let's pretend that that cell is San Francisco. And let's say that the cell way down here, which has to turn positive in the end, is New York. So let's say that we wanted to drive from San Francisco to New York. Now, if we were to go by the model that we've described right here, where charge is moving from one side of the heart to the other by going from cell to cell to cell, it would be kind of like using all of the local roads to get from one side of the country to the other. And as you can imagine, that road would take forever. So what do normal people do if they want to take a crazy long road trip from one side of the country to the other? Well, they take the highway. And while this doesn't cut down the distance by any amount, it actually speeds up the trip a lot because the highways are much, much faster. Well, it turns out that the heart actually has a system that's very similar to a highway, which allows charges to move really, really fast. And that system is called the electrical conduction system, which I've drawn here in pink. And all it is a set of tissues that are highly specialized for conducting charges really, really fast. So that would mean that if a cell in the right atrium got excited and turned positive, like so, then the charge could move to here really, really fast by taking the highways, the conduction system. And at the very end, what would happen is that the charge would come off of this so-called highway and then diffuse over to the tissue of interest, which is a lot faster over shorter distances. So let me kind of walk you through what this highway system involves. The tissue I've drawn in pink is made up of what is called Purkinje fibers. And Purkinje fibers are especially good at conducting charges fast. And like all highways, the heart's conduction system has certain landmarks that are very important to know. And I'm going to give you the names of those landmarks. so that you can reference them in the future. The first one is the SA node, or the sinoatrial node. And cells in the sinoatrial node are special because they can actually turn positive on the inside on their own without any outside help. And they're the ones that start the message to turn the entire heart positive. So it basically controls how fast your heart beats. The second important landmark is called the atrioventricular, or AV node. And like its name suggests, it sits between the atria, which are the top two chambers of the heart, and the ventricles, which are the bottom two chambers of the heart. It's kind of like a rest station along the way as a charge is making its journey from one side of the heart to the other. Charges move very slowly through the AV node, as if they're taking a break. The third important landmark is called the bundle of His. And this is a very, very short bundle of Purkinje fibers that runs from the atrioventricular node and connects it to the two branches that come off of it. And those two branches are also very important landmarks, and they're called the left bundle branch and the right bundle branch. And it's these bundle branches that carries the message of positivity to the ventricles, which are responsible for pumping blood to various parts of the body. They do this by little extensions, which are shown as finer pink lines. And these fine pink lines represent little extensions of the Purkinje fibers that dive down into the cells of the heart, into the actual muscle, and tell those cells to also become positive. And just for the sake of completeness, there are parts of the diagram that I haven't labeled, and those parts actually do have names, and I'm going to include them here, but don't worry about memorizing them. To signify that you don't really have to remember them, I'm going to write their names in a different color. Now let me walk you through how positive charge actually moves through this highway. So if it starts in this SA node, like right here, then because Purkinje fibers are so good at conducting charge really, really fast, the two atria, which are the two top chambers here and here, actually get the message really, really quickly because the charge travels along the Purkinje fibers. Then the message gets to the AV node right here. And the AV node is different in that it conducts charge very, very slowly. And the reason it does this is because it wants to separate the atria in getting the message and the ventricles in getting the message. So the AV node electrically separates the atria from the ventricles. So the charge creeps along and eventually reaches the bundle of His, and then it's able to go fast again. And it goes down the Purkinje fibers and gets to all parts of the heart really, really quickly. Now this sequence of events is really important because when cells in the heart get positive and excited, they also contract. So that means what happens first is that the atria get excited and they contract first. That means that blood that's pooled in the atria, like so, is pumped into the ventricles. And then, because of the AV node electrically separating the atria and the ventricles, there's a delay. And then after that delay, the ventricles contract too, causing blood to be pumped out of the heart.